All right, so I'm going to get things started here and try to adjust for the program. And I'll probably let's make sure that we're there. One more time. There we go. There it was. There we go. All right. So, I'm not doing something right. Let's try that again. There we go. I want to go ahead and put this on where we left off last time. And so this is, we talked about the Venus of Willendorf. This is the fertility sculptures. You'll see a picture of that, a different one on page 337 in your text. And these were probably fertility figures. I'll show you some other different ones. That's probably not what women look like. Neither was this. Many of these are very simplified. This is one that's carved of marble. Some are in the Greek islands. This is from mammoth ivory from a mammoth elephant 25,000 years ago. And these things some are more realistic than others, but these, embody the things that were about the beauty of women, the women bearing children, and so on. So these were important. You have a different arrangement of things than I have in the text, but Stonehenge is one of the things that the text talks about a little bit later, but I wanted to talk about it here. It was on the map earlier. Yeah, you can see that these are like posts and a lintel arrangement there, but actually we call this a megalith. Mega meaning very huge, and a lith referring to stone. And so Stonehenge is this site in southern England where people carried these stones maybe more than 100 miles by primitive means at this Salisbury Plain here. You see this outer ring there, 1800 to 1400 BC. These people were setting this up. They are arranged in a way where you see the summer and the winter solstice. There's people that still gather here for the beginning of spring, but you have these this outer ring. Let me go back to this other slide if this will show. No, it doesn't. I had another slide in the set that we looked at. This outer ring, there was a wooden version of this, and people would come from all over. They speculate many people are buried near here, so they would come to revere the people that were buried at this special site. People lived near there, but they had to have thought this was a very important place to set up these things to observe the seasons, but also ensure good harvest and good hunting and so on, and a good winter. Neolithic period, I'm not going to ask you a lot of things. I've listed them there on the review sheet. The New Stone Age, the Middle Stone Age. I'm not going to ask you the difference between those. Neo means new, of course, and it just lists in the text a lot of these different accomplishments during this period of time. I'm not going to focus a lot on those different lithic periods. Early civilizations, your text has this illustration on page 359. Talks about, 339. I have my book right in front of me. Cities were developed. Instead of just people wandering in tribes, they had a place for civilization, usually a source of water and a source where they could grow crops. There might have been good hunting in the area, but where they could also trade with other peoples and be successful. And talks about irrigation and so on. You see that purple area there along the Mesopotamian Valley, Tigris River. Remember the Tigris and Euphrates River, that's where it's mentioned in the Bible where Eden was, Adam and Eve. But that's the Fertile Crescent. It's sort of a crescent-shaped area, and there's another picture of it. Those places that we know today where Iran and Iraq and those countries are, Persia, Iran, the Persian Gulf there, that's where that civilization was centered in ancient times, and so we call that the Fertile Crescent. It's that sort of crescent-shaped area that followed those two river valleys. And the Ziggurat of Ur is in your text. It talks about this as a temple built around 21st century BC. This is a speculation that it may have been much higher. It was built as a temple for worship. People would come there from the surrounding areas. 210 feet by 150 feet and 10 stories high. Built of mud brick and fired brick. Saddam Hussein, I'll go back to this. The reason it looks like this is Saddam Hussein, when he was in power in Iraq, he wanted to capture the spirit of these ancients, and so he had much of this restored. It was in ruin. We can thank him for that. It's one good thing that he did. Your text has the Stele of Hammurabi in there, and that's on page 342. The thing about the Stele of Hammurabi, this column had this recorded set of laws at the bottom of it. And one of the things that it says about, let's see if I can switch my camera back to just me for a moment. One of the things about civilizations that are ancient civilizations, they were prehistoric. That means that there was still history there, but there was no written language or no written history. And the thing about historic civilizations was that they had a written language of some kind. They could record history in a way that they could read it and understand it. It would be preserved for all times, hopefully. Something like the stele. They had, some people call it stela anyway. This is a column of stone that they carved in there all of their laws. And so when we look at the notes I gave you, historic civilizations are marked by written language. And so you have things that we can decipher. Here's the entire thing. It's over 7 feet tall. It's in the Louvre Museum now. They preserved it there. Looks like a large finger type shape. But Hammurabi decided there would be law that applied to everyone. We enjoy the rule of law in this country that we live in, the great United States of America. And I don't know if you've heard that term before, but the rule of law is a very important thing. The rule of law says that the law applies equally to everyone, even the leaders. Now, sometimes we see that that's not always the case, or it seems like it's not. But Hammurabi said, here's this set of laws, and all the laws apply to everyone the same, and they even apply to me the same. And they had this whole set of laws that they had written down there, 281 laws, carved all along this, all up and down it on all sides, in cuneiform, and that was their language that they used. These little wedge-shaped marks that are carved into the hard stone there were actually originally done in clay with a piece of wood that was carved in a wedge shape like that, and they could press it in different directions in the clay and make these forms that were the letters. They've deciphered that. You can even find a site. There's an app and different things so you can write your name. I put life is brief, art is long, and my name there in cuneiform. But people have deciphered that. But that stele that we saw before, that Code of Hammurabi, was the rule of law for those people at that time. Some of the laws actually are reflected in our own Constitution about human rights and the rights of the people and the things that should be right in the law. This is from a slide that's not in the text, but this shows recording a volcanic eruption on this wall painting. So people recorded all kinds of things, The civilization of Troy is not really talked much about in your text, but I want to throw it in here because it's about the same area and the same era. Uh, there was this hill that was a ruin. There was a ruined area on in upper part of what is modern Turkey now, and these archaeologists had been reading the works of Homer, and they said there probably this may have actually been a real city of Troy. And if we could find it, that would be an amazing discovery. So they took the writings of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and so on, literally, and they found the city and they started excavating. And what they did when they found this mound, they actually used dynamite and started blowing this big trench in the middle. Archaeologists today are angry at what might have been lost in Troy, and there were amazing treasures there, beautiful gold jewelry and adornments, burials, but all these different sites, one built on the other over time, over the centuries. But they started excavating and finding, there's a guy named Frank Calvert, along with Heinrich Schliemann, and that's in your notes, I think, too. That Schliemann had the money, Frank Calvert was the archaeologist and had the training, so they went in and started digging, and they were more careful as they discovered things, but they discovered this set of ancient civilizations. This is a reconstruction of what the walled city and the village around it would have looked like. This is one of the gateways that they discovered. Schliemann is the guy that's on the left there, and Frank Calvert, I believe, on the right. Anyway, yeah, there's Calvert when he was younger, and Schliemann. But Schliemann had the money, and he takes a lot of the credit. We want to make sure Calvert is the one who was the real archaeologist there. You can see these amazing things that they would find. There were on burials, this diadem or this crown that was put on one of the royal people in the burial. Beautiful things there, and these amazing buildings that these folks did, and the gold work and so on. These were all a funeral mask. And you've heard of the Trojan horse, you've seen movies about Troy and so on. They built this for one of the movies that was done. We don't know exactly if that was true or not, but it's interesting to speculate. This is what the site looks like now, and there's still ongoing excavations there. A site like this, they could excavate for hundreds of years, probably. If you've ever seen the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? That's really based on the writings of Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and Odysseus, and the main character in that is Ulysses, and you have the blind seer, and do not seek the treasure, and all kinds of things like that are parallels in that movie. So if you watch that crazy movie, it's kind of a fun look at an old legend. Here's the area of ancient Greece, and you see where Athens is there, and some of the areas we were just talking about. There's Knossos on the Isle of Crete we'll look at, that has these amazing temples. Crete had this separate culture because they were an island nation, and you have these inverted columns that are small at the bottom, large at the top, and remnants of murals that were painted there. The Minotaur, you have that legend there. But all these, there are some remnants of them that just give us a glimpse of how amazing these cultures were. These people lived well. They had art and culture. They had a civilization. They had laws. They had trade with other nations. So we have to kind of just think back and use our imagination a little bit to think of, really, it was a wonderful life for these people. They didn't have modern conveniences, but they had amazing lives. And the bull leapers and those kind of things. That's the precursor to the rodeo, right? Here's the standard of Ur. This is in your text on page 341. And beautiful artwork, a musical instrument, a lyre there, and this sculpture's on that same page. Looks like someone didn't like that ruler and they hacked away at the eye. Things like this that have been taken to museums. This is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, right off the main street there in the edge of Central Park. This huge winged lion that was one of the gates to this city in Mesopotamia, the palace at Nimrud. Thankfully, they preserved it. The people that have come along there and destroyed things would have gotten rid of it. And this is in the Berlin Museum. That's glazed brick. So it's pretty amazing to think about how beautiful these cities were, and thankfully they've been preserved in places. Now, we go from the Fertile Crescent area, Mesopotamia, and that area that we know as Iraq and Iran and those nations, Persia, to the Fertile Ribbon. And don't confuse those two. The Fertile Ribbon is the River Nile. That's where the pyramids are. And you have a little bit about Egyptian art and civilization in your text, starting on page 343. The pyramids, great ancient wonders of the world, but these were tombs. And you can see these massive blocks there that are built there. Pyramids, the Great Pyramid, the largest one there, was originally 479 feet tall, covers 13 acres. That's hard to imagine. And 2.3 million blocks were used, and each of those blocks of stone that you see here weigh about 2.5 tons each. And they were built just with a lot of manpower. Many people say they were built with slave labor. There might have been some slave labor, but near the pyramids, about 30 years ago, they found a huge village, and they found evidence of payment and so on. These people were paid workers that worked on building this tomb for the ancient kings. You see where someone blasted a hole in two places there to try to get to what was the treasure they knew was in there. There's the Grand Gallery, these hidden passageways. They still think they someday might find the hidden passageway that would lead to the treasure, because in the king's chamber, Khufu or Khafre, the king that this Great Pyramid was built for, there's just part of the stone casket, a sarcophagus in there. The top is broken away, missing, and no treasure at all in there. So we can only wonder at what was in the king and queen's chamber, because they buried all their goods from this life, from the life they lived, and for the afterlife. And you see the kind of setup there. This is in the text. The next couple of pages, page 346, shows this, the causeway, and they had this whole temple complex. It's in ruins now, but it was grand in the day. And again, this is 2,500 years BC. You have the Great Sphinx there, carved out of the native rock, and some people say Napoleon's cannon shot off the nose. It probably just came off by natural erosion. If you watch any of these things on PBS or other Discovery Channel about Egypt, you see this guy, Zahi Hawass. He's aging now, but he was the king bee for years. Anything that happened archaeologically in Egypt had to have him present or have his okay. But you can see how huge that is with the scale there. Egyptian civilization maintained stability in the area, and they ruled that part of the world for centuries. And Hatshepsut was a woman pharaoh, and one of the few female rulers that they had there. Here's Khafre. And you see that these sculptures are made of a big piece of stone. It's kind of blocky, but it's fairly naturalistic. They got more real and natural as time went on. You see the falcon there with the wings embracing it. That was a symbol of the sun god. That was very important. The Egyptians, this is not in the text, but they would take the major organs out of the body. Now, it's strange to us. You embalm bodies today to preserve them for burial, but also to have a funeral a few days later, within 2 or 3 days. If the body's not cremated, then to preserve the body, they remove all the internal organs that would cause more decay, and they take out the blood and so on. But the Egyptians took out major organs like the lung and the heart and the liver, but they removed the brain and they threw it away. They didn't think it was important at all. And so they put these organs in these special jars called canopic jars that were buried with the pharaoh, the rulers, the king and queen, and so on. The greatest Egyptian discovery ever was King Tutankhamun, and it mentions him in your text, but I wanted to show you a few other slides of that. And I've seen this treasure. I haven't been to Egypt. I'd love to go someday when it's safe to go. But they brought these 2 different times to America, and I saw them in Chicago at the Field Museum, and saw this mask of King Tut, and has the symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt, the cobra and the vulture there. You see his long beard, which was really just attached to him. He was a boy king, started being king about 9 or 10 years old, only ruled, he was died in an accident or maybe was murdered when he was about 18 or 19. But this is a gold headpiece that's set on top of his mummy wrappings inside his coffin, made of pure gold and semi-precious stones. It's hard to imagine. And all inside, there are all these hieroglyphs inside there that would help prepare him for the afterlife. And one of the things that I put in the notes was the importance of preserving the body, but there's also a style in the paintings that were in the tomb, and they call it frontality. You walk like an Egyptian. Well, to not have the body cut across by an arm or some other thing is very important. So you see them in these poses like that. So the arms are not in front of the body is fully exposed. So preserving the body for the soul or the ka to re-enter the body was very important. So this depiction and all these hieroglyphs in there were to help, they were like prayers to have the soul reunited with the body. Now I've had people say, well, the Egyptians believed in reincarnation. No, they did not. And I talked to a pastor one time who had just come back from being in King Tut's tomb, and he said, the thing about the Egyptians, it was amazing. As the tomb was being prepared, the family would go there and almost like a picnic, they would look at the tomb as it progressed, because they knew someday they would be buried there and the body would be preserved. So as the soul left the body when they died, then it would be reunited with the body later on. And he said it's not a lot different than Christians believe today. And so their beliefs were different, yes, but some similarities. King Tut entering the realm of the gods, and a little whitish oval thing at the top is his special sarcophagus symbol. And it shows a beetle rolling the sun, which the dung beetles rolled a little ball of dung across the ground. They said that was a symbol of the sun god rolling the sun across the sky each day. And you see the Ankh symbol he's holding, a symbol of life. So preserving the body, preserving it for the soul to be reunited with it is important. And we know how to read these hieroglyphs because of this Rosetta Stone. It was a very important thing, and I find it strange the text really doesn't mention it or doesn't depict it, but I think it's important because we wouldn't know hieroglyphs if it weren't for that. This is a stone that was probably part of a larger piece of stone, a stele, which had 3 different languages on it. Napoleon's men found it in some rubble. They thought it was important, but it had ancient, Demotic, and it had Greek and at the bottom, but it had the hieroglyphs at the very top. And so this genius named Francois Champollion realized that those may have been the same passages recorded there on this piece of stone, carved into it, and he worked out the alphabet. You see these archaeologists on these shows on PBS, the Discovery Channel, whatever, they're from America. They can run their fingers along those hieroglyphs and read them just like you and I would read English. So they figured that these were not just magical symbols, but they were symbols for sounds of words, and that they were the language. Howard Carter discovered King Tut's tomb, and I have that in the text here because it was one of the most important discoveries in history, not only because it gave us some insight into ancient Egypt, but the tomb was intact. King Tut was a fairly unimportant ruler, but you see the stone sarcophagus, the wood and gold and semi-precious stones on the wooden coffin. Inside was a gold coffin solid gold with semi-precious stones, and inside that was King Tut's mummy. Didn't survive just real well, but you consider 2,500 years or so, it's a long time. And once they did the mummy, uncovered the mummy, the wrappings, this is what he looked like. But what's interesting is they did, and this depiction on the gold coffin was probably what he really looked like. Howard Carter took a picture, and they even had, like we'd give flowers at a funeral, have flowers there. They even put some flowers and things around that seal at the top of the head there. That's the gold headpiece again. But they think that that's very much what he looked like, because they've done scans of his skull, and you know, you look like what you look like because of your skull. And that's how forensic people do these measurements of different parts of the skull. It gives you your look that you have. And so pretty much that was, if that's true, what he looked like. So that's interesting. Gives us a look back. All this amazing jewelry, thousands and thousands of objects of gold, amazing treasure. Took them years and years to excavate this. This is a scarab necklace. That's that beetle again, symbolizing the sun god, and the wings of the falcon, the same thing. And here's a falcon. All this gold and semi-precious and precious stones. That beetle's body is made from when a meteorite hit some sand on the other side of the Nile and formed glass, maybe 1,000 years before the Egyptians, and they carved that into that shape of the scarab. Pretty amazing, truly. And this is in your text, but the Egyptian civilization was a very important one, and I've listed all those things in the notes there. Here's the palette of Narmer, showing the king defeating the enemy. Now we're going to move back a little further on to the Aegean world, the Greek and Roman civilizations. We've already talked about the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. These were named that the top of the column, or what we call the capital there, had a different style for the architecture in different places. The Doric at Ionia was a place there in Greek civilization. Corinth was a place, you see it mentioned in the Bible. Paul's letter to the Christian church at Corinthians, at Corinth, the Corinthians. You know that, maybe. Pardon me. But you have this style. We've already looked at these different styles. Flip back to the beginning of this chapter, talk about the Parthenon sculptures, and I'm not going to stress this just a whole lot here, but just to show you where they talk about the importance of this temple. Pardon me. This is on this high hill there in Athens, and overlook the entire city. They built this temple to Athena Parthenos, and the people couldn't even enter the temple. Only the priestess, the priest could enter the temple. They could come there and leave their request. All very mysterious. Pardon me. There's a breakdown of what the inside, that's floor plan, what it looked like, all the different sculptures that were there. I'll show you in a moment the statue of Athena and what it probably looked like, and the treasury inside and so on. These sculptures that were on the outside, we call that the pediment, or the friezes that were underneath, above the columns there. This is another view of the Acropolis, what it probably looked like in the day. Still towers over the city, but it's in ruins today. You'll see modern pictures. There's scaffolding all around the Parthenon. They're restoring it as well as they can. They're still missing some of the important sculptures that were taken away to other places. Pardon me. We know that Iktinos and Callicrates were the architects of this amazing building using that golden mean, the golden rectangle. 448 to 432 BC. The text shows these pediment sculptures, and they're in ruin. Many of them were pried off the building and taken to different places. These are in the British Museum. They have a museum down the hill from that Acropolis hill there, where they preserve many of the things that were left there, but they keep asking the French and British governments, please, we want our sculptures back. But what remains in all places are not as beautiful as they would have been originally. This is what they speculate the East Pediment would have looked like, and now it's in ruins. That's just a remnant of it. The West Pediment had all these scenes, very dimensional, almost freestanding sculptures, some relief, but some the horses and the people, these gods and goddesses that were depicted there. It's pretty amazing what they look like, and they were probably painted. They found remnants of paint on them, and some had probably gold on them. This is a cutaway view of the Parthenon and what it likely looked like. But if you want to see the Parthenon, you don't have to go all the way there. You don't have to see it in ruins. When Tennessee had their centennial, and they were 100 years old as a state, they said Nashville is the Athens of the West. And so they built a replica of the Parthenon. They sent people, architects, designers, and all there, and they came back and built a permanent, it's concrete and stone, but a permanent replica of the Parthenon, life size. And you pay a few dollars, $10 or so to go in there. It's worth it, believe me. Yeah, go to Nashville and see the country music stuff and Grand Ole Opry, all that stuff is great. But go to the Parthenon, and you walk in there, and a sculptor named Alan LeQuire has done a fiberglass and then coated with gold leaf replica of Athena Parthenos. Now you see that velvet rope there at the bottom? When I stood there and looked at that, my family and I went there, my eye level was at her feet. That's how huge this is. And this Nike, the winged messenger, right in her hand, that is 6 feet tall. So it's a pretty incredible thing that they did to build this replica of what it looked like. You have these massive bronze doors, like probably were there. All this is broken up and stolen, carried away, melted down over the centuries. But research and accounts of what exists, they built this. And you should see it. You need to go there. But these sculptures give us a little glimpse at what the amazing accomplishments of the Greeks were. Now, you see on the left there the style changes. And the text talks about this a little bit, but the style was much more simplistic. And as the Greeks, now this is a Roman replica of a Greek sculpture, but they got more naturalistic, but they also idealized the figures. And the Greeks felt like, you know, the body was almost divine. It was the gift from God, but it was a representation of the gods. And so the Olympic Games were born out of all that and so on. So you see a different, much more natural figure there, and you have sculptures like this, showing Greek myths and so on. And here's one of the Venuses. Venus de Milo is the most famous one. It's in the Louvre, and there are people that speculated we could reconstruct it. I think it looks just fine, just like it is. Here's the sculpture of Nike that's in the Louvre. It stood on a cliff. It was like Nike of Samothrace there in that location in Greece, ancient Greece. And the head's missing, the arms are missing, but it's still considered one of the great sculptures ever done. 190 BC, carved in marble. You have Nike company today, whatever you think about Nike and some of the ways that things are done with the Nike company in China and so on now. But people call that check mark or that swoosh. Well, that swoosh was inspired by Nike, the winged messenger, and that's the wing, right? So just to clarify where that logo came from and what the idea was and this connection with ancient Greece. And the text has some of these, and I've added some more in there. But you have these beautiful ancient pottery pieces and so on. But we get democracy, and look at our county courthouses, even in West Texas. Look at our federal government. We get the style of the buildings. Much of our laws are founded on the equality that was achieved in ancient Greece, and the ideas of what humanity could do, the sciences, medicine, and so on, were we go back to that. And many of our words have the base from ancient Greece civilization. Humanity was the most perfect creation, the Greeks felt like. But the text talks about this a little bit, but I have it in the notes. And it says Greek culture lasted about 1,000 years, but there was only one little period, a span in there of about 80 years that's called the Golden Age, the period of the greatest achievement in art and culture. Now you see where the Greek islands are. You see the boot of Italy there. The Roman civilization came after, and they idealized what the Greeks had done and used much of it. But these sculptures were probably done at different times. You have the legend of Romulus and Remus, who were raised by wolves, these twins that were orphaned. That's true or not, but they founded Rome, and you see Rome and the whole realm of Roman civilization there. It spread from the British Isles all the way down into Africa and the Mid-East. Pretty incredible that they took over pretty much the known world at that time. They were very powerful. The things that the Romans accomplished, again, go back to Greek culture and civilization, but they accomplished a great deal. And the Roman army was a good reason for it, but what they would do is not just conquer a country or people. They would go into these civilizations that were already established. They had the most powerful army. Sometimes they waged war for years, but sometimes people just laid down their arms and they made a deal with them that we'll be your subjects. And the Romans had this idea. They called it really bread and circuses. They said, we will provide food for you, grain for bread, and we'll provide protection, but we'll also provide entertainment. So they built these arenas in almost every one of these cities. Many of them still exist. There's one right in the middle of Paris today that they found when they were doing some excavation for street work. And here's this arena that was built by the Romans 1,000 years before. And here's more than 1,000 years before. Here's 3rd century CE in Tunisia today, but many of these are in ruins. Of course, they had a system of laws and government organization, the army. They had money. That was very important to have a monetary system and so on. You have these amazing imperial monuments. And so what they did was incredible. One of the things about Roman art, though, is much more realistic and naturalistic. The Greeks idealized things, and they took these wax masks from people when they died. They could do it when they were alive, but they were able then to carve sculptures of them that were more realistic. And here's a citizen carrying these death masks of his ancestors, and they took that wax and then carved them into stone. This is a Roman sculpture, and I think this is in your text too, and I'm not giving you page numbers now, I'm just kind of going through this material. 1st century BC, so this is almost from the time of Christ. It is from the time of Christ. You would never see a Greek sculpture like this. Look at all the wrinkles and bumps and so on in this man's face. You could probably pick this guy out of a crowd, right? This is probably a sculpture that looked just like this person here. And even though it's broken off of the full sculpture, the head is intact, and it shows us a typical Roman sculpture that was much more realistic. We've talked about some of these innovations, the Roman arch and concrete, and the aqueducts and the Colosseum. We looked at the Pantheon before. If you go to Rome today, and you should see it, it's an amazing thing. That M there that you see is a metro stop. That's the subway that goes under the city. They have a pretty amazing subway system. You get off there, and you walk across the street, and you better look out, 'cause there's some crazy drivers. But you find at that end, there's also the only place I saw practically in all of Europe where they had ice with Coke. They have Coke machines everywhere, but they're not cold usually. But you walk across the street and you can see parts of the ancient city that have been preserved. So that's the Roman Forum and the Palatine Hill there. There's the Colosseum. You see the Palatino and the Roman Forum there. And you can walk on these ancient streets. You can walk through the Arch of Titus and see this. And there are guys, and some of them are more real armor. There's some guys that came up to us, wanted €5, have our picture made with them. They had this plastic armor on. We declined, but you can see and kind of get a taste of what it was actually like. These amazing places preserved. Now, one of the best places that's preserved is Pompeii. You take a train and ride about an hour or so south of Rome, and you get to this little city of Pompeii. Mount Vesuvius still looms over the city. They have possibility of another volcanic eruption. Who knows when? Anytime, possibly. If this thing rumbles, and people are worried about it, but they still live near it. This is a paved street they uncovered. Now, Pompeii is amazing, but look at that map of Pompeii today. The green areas they've excavated, the tannish areas, who knows what's there. And they've been excavating since the 1700s. So they found that you can see the arena there and many of these amazing places. But in 79 AD, Vesuvius blew its top. And if you've studied geology and seen Mount St. Helens or whatever pyroclastic flow is more than 300 miles an hour, people were kind of used to the mountain doing this and spewing smoke and so on. Many had fled, but a lot of people didn't. And if they hadn't fled already, there's no way you can outrun this thing. And so it was inundated over 30, 40 feet of debris from ash and so on. And you can see where they haven't excavated there. That's volcanic ash and mud and so on from the volcano from 79 AD. But when they do dig down, they have these amazing town sites, villages. The villages are preserved, people's homes, the businesses. They're amazing paintings. These frescoes that are done on the wall, they're preserved from 79 AD. And the amphitheaters there. One of the things they found was when they dug down, they found these openings in the ash, and someone said, well, I don't know what these are, but let's pour some plaster in there and see what it is. Well, they were where bodies had decayed, and people who had died in the volcanic eruption and being covered up by hot ash and